Hello, first grade, and welcome back for another chapter of Charlotte's Web. This next chapter is chapter 10, Explosion. Day after day, the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. There she is, head down. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she waited long enough about Wilbur's problems, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, the idea came. "Why, how perfectly simple," she said to herself. "The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs." Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. "What are you thinking about, Charlotte?" he said. "I was just thinking that people are very gullible." "What does gullible mean?" "Easy to fool," said Charlotte. "That's a mercy," replied Wilbur. He lay down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone. She knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arable wandered into Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen. "Just in time for a piece of blueberry pie," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Look at my frog," said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for pie. "Take that thing out of here," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "He's hot," said Fern. "He's almost dead, that frog." "He is not," said Avery. "He lets me scratch him between the eyes." The frog jumped and landed on Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. "You're getting your pie on you," said Fern. "Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith?" "Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens." "It's getting all over everything," shouted Fern. "His pie is all over his front." "Come on, frog," said Avery. He scooped up his frog, and the frog kicked, splashing soapy water into his blueberry pie. "Another crisis," groaned Fern. "Let's swing on the swing," said Avery. The children ran to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. It was a long, single piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft, and then holding the rope, you stood at the edge, looked down, and you were scared and dizzy. But then you got up your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. And for a second, you seemed to be falling to the barn floor far below. But then suddenly the rope would begin to catch you, and you would sail through the barn door going a mile a minute with the wind whistling in your eyes and ears and hair. And then you would zoom up towards the sky and look up at the clouds, and then the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope. You would drop down, down, down out of the sky and come sailing back to the barn, almost to the hayloft, and then sail out again, but not so far this time. Then in again, not so high, then out, then in again, then out, and then you jump off and fall down and let somebody else try it. Mothers for miles around worried about that swing. They feared that some children would fall off of it, but no child ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed into the hayloft. "The last time I swang in this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow," he yelled. "Take that frog out," yelled Fern. Avery swaddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all, into the sky, frog and all. Then he sailed back into the barn. "Your tongue is purple," screamed Fern. "So's yours," said Avery, sailing out again with the frog. "I have hay inside my dress. It itches," called Fern. "Scratch it," said Avery. "It's my turn," yelled Fern. "Jump off." "Fern's got the itch," said Avery. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes tight and jumped. She felt the dizzy drop and then the supporting lift of the swing. When she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky and was about to fly back through the door. There is Fern on the swing. See, they would climb up into the hayloft, hold on to the rope tight, and jump, holding on to the rope, and they would swing out and back. They took turns for about an hour. Then the children grew tired of swinging. They went down towards the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside of it and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog in it. The frog seemed tired after his morning of swimming. After his morning on the swing. The children walked slowly toward the barn. They too were tired and had hardly any energy at all to walk. "Let's build a tree house," said Avery. "I want to live in a tree with my frog." "I'm going to visit Wilbur," said Fern. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily to the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. Avery noticed the spider web, and coming closer, he saw Charlotte. "Hey, look at that big spider," he said. "It's tremendous." "Leave it alone," said Fern. "You've got a frog. Isn't that enough?" "That's a fine spider. I'm going to capture it," said Avery. He took the cover off the candy bar. Then he picked up a stick. "I'm going to knock that old spider into this box," he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded. "You stop it, Avery," said Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick and hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed on the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and then came down with a slap. The goose egg was right underneath it. Remember the rotten one? There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gases and smells from the rotten egg. Templeton, who'd been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. "Good night," screamed Avery. "Good night. What a stink. Let's get out of here." Fern was crying. She held her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. Whew, that had been a narrow escape. Later on that morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, lambs, gander, goose, and the 7 goslings. Oh, here's a picture of him falling. Let me show you that. And see, the rotten egg is right underneath there, and it crashed down on the egg. Later on that morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again about how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte and how the smell of the broken egg drove him away just in time. "It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life," said Wilbur. The goose was proud of her share in this adventure. "I'm delighted the egg never hatched," she said. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg. He couldn't resist boasting. "It pays to save things," he said. "A rat never knows when something's going to come in handy. That's why I never throw anything away." "Well," said one of the lambs, "this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte. But what about the rest of us? This smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed with rotten egg?" "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers and then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Larvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food, he stopped short a few paces. "What in thunder?" Setting the pail down, he picked up the stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. "Rats! Woof! I might have known a rat would make a nest under this trough. I hate rats." Then Lurby dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions. When he picked up the pail, Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured. The slops ran creamily down the side. And around the pig's eyes and ears, Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get everything. It was a delicious meal. Skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half of a donut, the rind of summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of a ginger snap, a fish tail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from noodle soup, the scum off of a cup of cocoa, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of paper from the lining of a garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life and that Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared and the barn smelled good again. The afternoon passed and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily while the other creatures dozed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed the work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled the night song. Charlotte tore quite a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads that she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump, around midnight, the spider was still at work. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 10. I'm excited for us to read chapter 11 together. We'll start that next week. Chapter 11, The Miracle. I'll see you then.